Ethel Kennedy, a beloved figure in American history, passed away last week at the age of 96 after suffering complications from a stroke. Her passing has resonated deeply with people across the nation and around the world, but perhaps nowhere more so than within her own family. As the widow of Robert F. Kennedy, Ethel lived a life full of both privilege and immense tragedy, yet she maintained a grace and quiet strength that defined her until her final days. For the Kennedy family, Ethel represented much more than the matriarch who oversaw a vast and complex lineage. She was the glue that held generations together, a steadfast symbol of the family's resilience through decades of public triumphs and personal hardships. Her grandson, Joe Kennedy III, shared the heartbreaking news of her passing in a deeply emotional statement that captured not just the grief of the family, but also their immense pride in the life she led. It is with our hearts full of love that we announce the passing of our amazing grandmother, Ethel Kennedy. She died this morning from complications related to a stroke suffered last week, he said. The statement encapsulated a profound truth about Ethel's life, that it was not just defined by her connection to one of America's most famous families, but by the extraordinary legacy of love and service she left behind. As Joe put it, along with a lifetime's work in social justice and human rights, our mother leaves behind 9 children, 34 grandchildren, and 24 great-great-grandchildren, along with numerous nieces and nephews, all of whom love her dearly. This touching tribute was not just about Ethel's role within her family, but also a reminder of the impact she made on the world beyond it. The news of her death brought to mind the deep connections Ethel had fostered throughout her life, from the political realm to her charitable work, to her steadfast devotion to her Catholic faith. Today, her family gathered on Cape Cod for a funeral mass at Our Lady of Victory in Centerville, Massachusetts, a fitting place for such a devout Catholic to be remembered and celebrated. The church, a modest yet deeply spiritual setting, reflected the humility with which Ethel lived her life. Despite her immense influence and proximity to power, Ethel was never someone who sought the limelight. Instead, she preferred to work behind the scenes, quietly dedicating her time and energy to causes she cared about and the family she loved so deeply. Carrie Kennedy, one of Ethel's 9 children, once reflected on her mother's unshakable faith, saying, "She goes to Mass every day of her life. She prays on her knees before church, prays before every meal, and prays on her knees before going to bed." This commitment to her faith was central to who Ethel was, providing her with the strength to endure some of the darkest moments of her life, including the assassination of her husband in 1968. Ethel's faith was not just a private matter, it was a core part of her public life, shaping the values she instilled in her children and the work she did on behalf of social justice and human rights. As her family mourned her passing, they took solace in the knowledge that she had lived a life deeply rooted in her faith, one that had given her the fortitude to navigate the many challenges that came her way. While Ethel's final resting place has yet to be publicly shared, there is little doubt that it will hold a deep significance for her family and the many people whose lives she touched. Kennedy family has long been associated with several burial sites of immense historical importance, including Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia, where both her husband, Robert F. Kennedy, and his brother, President John F. Kennedy, are buried. Additionally, 2 of Ethel's sons, David and Michael, are buried in the Kennedy family plot at Holyhood Cemetery in Brookline, Massachusetts, alongside other notable members of the Kennedy family. Ethel's in-laws, Joseph and Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, are also laid to rest there, further cementing the importance of this site to the Kennedy family legacy. Ethel's own parents, George and Ann Skakel, met a tragic end in a plane crash in 1955 and were laid to rest in St. Mary's Cemetery in Greenwich, Connecticut. This personal loss, which occurred when Ethel was just 27 years old, was one of many tragedies she would endure over the course of her long life. Yet despite these heart-wrenching losses, Ethel remained a model of strength and grace. Her ability to endure, to remain committed to her family and her values even in the face of overwhelming grief, became one of her most defining characteristics. Ethel's husband, Robert F. Kennedy, was assassinated in 1968, just 5 years after his brother John's assassination. This devastating loss left Ethel a widow at just 40 years old, with 11 children to raise on her own. But as always, she turned to her faith for strength and solace. Ethel did not allow the tragedy of Robert's death to consume her. Instead, she channeled her grief into action, continuing his work on behalf of civil rights, human rights, and social justice causes. She became a tireless advocate for the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Organization, which has worked for decades to promote justice and equality around the world. Ethel's life after Robert's death was characterized by both her devotion to her family and her commitment to carrying on the legacy of public service that had defined the Kennedy family for generations. She raised her children with the same values that had guided her own life: compassion, faith, and a sense of duty to others. Despite the immense pressures and scrutiny that came with being a member of the Kennedy family, Ethel managed to create a warm and loving home for her children, one where they could grow and thrive. Many of her children followed in her and Robert's footsteps, becoming public figures in their own right and continuing the family's legacy of public service. Her son Robert F. Kennedy Jr. became a prominent environmental lawyer and activist, while her daughter Carrie Kennedy took up the mantle of human rights advocacy. Joseph P. Kennedy too served as a U.S. congressman from Massachusetts, and many of her grandchildren, including Joe Kennedy III, have gone on to careers in public service as well. Through her children and grandchildren, Ethel's influence continues to be felt in the world today. Her dedication to family and her commitment to public service are values that have been passed down through generations of Kennedys, ensuring that her legacy will live on for many years to come. Ethel's passing has prompted an outpouring of tributes from across the political spectrum, with many people recognizing the profound impact she had on both her family and the world at large. She was a woman who lived through some of the most significant moments in American history, from the civil rights movement to the assassination of her husband and brother-in-law, yet she never allowed these events to define her. Instead, she continued to focus on what mattered most to her: her faith, her family, and her work to make the world a better place. Her funeral mass at Our Lady of Victory was a solemn and emotional occasion, attended by family, friends, and loved ones who came together to celebrate her life and honor her memory. The Mass, a reflection of Ethel's deep Catholic faith, was a fitting tribute to a woman who had lived her life in service to both God and others. Church, nestled in the quiet community of Centerville, Massachusetts, was filled with the sounds of prayer and reflection as those who knew Ethel best said their final goodbyes. While Ethel's passing marks the end of an era for the Kennedy family, her legacy will live on through the many lives she touched, both within her family and beyond. She leaves behind a remarkable legacy of love, faith, and service, one that will continue to inspire future generations of Kennedys and all those who believe in the power of compassion and justice. As her family continues to reflect on her life and her many accomplishments, they will undoubtedly find comfort in the knowledge that Ethel lived a full and meaningful life, one that made a lasting impact on the world.